What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Blood, Sweat, and Gear with Skip Hill, Andrew Berry. I'm Scott McNally. All of our programming is brought to you by you, the awesome people at Patreon. Thank you, everybody who's jumping in and taking part to help support the programming, because YouTube's not. Well, they are kind of sometimes when they decide to. We're also brought to you by True Nutrition. You can use our code THINK over at truenutrition.com. You can get some high-quality third-party tested supplements over there. If you're in the UK, you can shop with STROM Sports Nutrition for some good health supplements, really good blends. SupportMAX, that's the one I suggest you check out if you're on cycle especially. And, of course, go to supplementsource.ca for our Canadians. I saw the Granite Recovery product there. One of our listeners sent it to me for like $15 because it was like a closeout deal. Yeah. So if you're in Canada, you can get a deal over there. Otherwise, you know what? You can shop with Granite here in the U.S. and use Andrew's code. What is it?
Berry 10.
Berry 10. All right. So anyway, we're going to start out with a bunch of stuff, guys. If you want to take part in the next show, let me encourage you to comment below. We'll take your questions then. After this episode, we're going to need a bunch of questions. Today, we're going to start out talking about a topic Skip has. This is something Andrew wanted to bring up. So we're going to drag up some coaching secrets from Skip.
Secrets.
Something to do with pulling out the carbs from your pre-workout meal. I feel like there's a Bible out there for bodybuilding dieting, and that is that's on the list of things, the first thing you don't do. Tell us about it.
Add that to the list of things that I'm not supposed to do, or we're not supposed to do. Everybody wants carbs. Everybody has always wanted carbs, right? Prior to training. Intra, I think, is a little bit different. So I don't want anybody they may listen. We're talking about carbs pre-workout and they're thinking, oh, they must think intras. But I think it's a completely different issue because of the depletion that's going on. You're replenishing very, very quickly. Same with EAAs, intra too. Totally different animal. My argument has always been that the meal prior to training doesn't need to be heavy on carbs for a couple reasons. Number one, in my own experience, I just don't function as well in the gym. When I say heavy, I don't mean, 150 grams of carbs, but speaking for myself, to give some numbers for perspective, I don't want even 50 grams of carbs or 60 grams of carbs prior to training. I focus more on protein and fat at that. There might be some carbs. I'm not just trying to go keto and anti-carb and I can't have any carbs in me. What I'm saying is I don't feel like I need this bolus of carbs prior to training because it's going to help me to increase intensity, help me to, be stronger or anything like that. Plus, we all know that digestion takes place not in 15 or 20 minutes, but over the next few hours. So that needs to be factored in as well. They get in the way for me. They distend me. They kind of bog me down. I just don't feel as good. And the premise is pretty much this simple. The fuel used while you're training for anaerobic exercise, which is weight training, is glycogen. That's the primary. That's how you get a pump. So circulating blood glucose levels need to be high going in. In fact, I think it's detrimental for those people who, even though there's 100 different ways for, there's individual components, there's different methods. That's fine. I'm speaking for myself and my experience. That's why I don't agree with taking in high glycemic carbs or even, shitty carbs prior to training. And yet I do think they're great post-training, which is one of my rants that I fought myself to go on this last week on Facebook, because there seems to be a trend right now where people and trainers, I would say wannabe trainers, but some other trainers too, are kind of getting on this bandwagon of, cereal is it's so 1999. It's just so, you don't need to do that. And posting studies about how it's not, okay, you posted studies that it's not different. So if it's not different, then get off of the cereal issue.
What does it matter?
Yeah.
What does it matter? Exactly. But that's another discussion. The point is the pre-workout carbs, to me, I think they get way more attention than they need. And I think they're highly overrated. And I think I've heard you say that, Andrew, that you made a change too, and you saw positives from pulling carbs prior to. Did you pull all of them or just some of them?
So when I had read your intense muscle post about it, this is going back 10 or 12 or I can't remember, 15 years maybe.
Oh, well,
and
then
I'm
that's
like,
outdated by now. Who would do something so old?
Yeah. No, so I will immediately started thinking about it. I'm like, okay, well, if I'm eating enough carbohydrates, specifically my post-workout meal the day before, I should have theoretically replenished my glycogen, and the glycogen I'm using throughout the day I was on my feet back then being a trainer, to walk around my day, I'm feeding my breakfast, my subsequent meals after that. So why would I need a big bolus carbohydrate meal, especially if it's, like you said, bog you down during your training? Like for me, I want my stomach as empty as possible. And while I have, back then I pulled all my carbs out and I was just doing like maybe chicken and peanut butter or chicken and nuts or something. Today I do utilize carbohydrates pre-workout, but it is my smallest carbohydrate meal to this day that I take in. Yeah. Like right now, my pre-workout meal is a cup of that 25 gram Greek yogurt, a scoop of whey protein thrown in, and 80 grams of granola, you know. Little untraditional. I know most people don't associate granola with a pre-workout food, but it digests so well for me that by the time I get to the gym an hour and a half later, my stomach feels like it's near empty, and I can do my intra and I can do my training and I feel great. Like we always talk about rules, and I don't care like about any of these rules. It comes down to like what works for the client's digestion, for them for them to be able to have the most effective workout. And if you're trying to slam 150 grams of carbs at someone, maybe a mixture of rice and some fruit and, some easier to digest carbohydrates, that's still a big volume of food in your digestive system. And you better believe it's going to take more than an hour to digest that by the time you get to the gym and start moving around. And then you're sending mixed signals to your body, right? Your body's in rest and digest, but then your brain's trying to tell your muscles to turn on the sympathetic nervous system, and that don't end very well for most people.
Sure. You also have blood supply for digestion that at that time your body is fighting, because the blood wants to go to the working muscle. So digestion, I mean, let's be fair, how efficient can digestion really be, which is for a solid food meal while you're training, which is exactly why, or the argument for intra nutrition, because it's so fast and you have a higher amount of fluid, which is funny because, and I think it's a good point to make, intra workout nutrition is pretty important. But if you don't have enough water, those supplements are going to sit in your gut, and the gastric emptying isn't going to be as quick. You're not going to be providing that quick
No, you're not.
supply or assimilation of the nutrients that you're taking in intra. You make a very good point to Andrew that I didn't even think about before until we're talking about this right now. You touched on the time. I do something similar now too. My meal pre-workout is not zero carb. It is one of my lower carb meals, but here's the caveat. I don't train for about 2 hours after my last meal.
Yeah.
And that's part of the digestion process too. Not only do I not want it in my stomach, but I want to have started to store so that I don't have those circulating blood glucose levels that are higher. Now, quinoa, chicken breast, and pecorino cheese, as an example, is not going to cause huge levels of circulating blood glucose. That's not really my main focus at that point. But I think people who focus on taking in more carbs, I think they tend to think they give it more importance, or they think it's more important than what it actually is for how their performance is going to be in the gym. And I would argue that it's not going to help at all unless you didn't eat all day. and at the same time, it may actually pull and make your training slightly less effective. I mean, let's go to the most obvious. Let's just say that everything is equal, but you're 20 or 30 minutes into your workout and you have to go take a shit. Carbs will you have to go to the bathroom. God, I already lost it.
Twice.
Carbs were demonetized. So
that's your favorite,
again,
the S word.
You can't say God either.
It must be. It must be. It used to be the F word, but I've matured over the years. So now it's the less offensive swearing. But anyway, you get in 20 or 30 minutes, and what's going to make you have to go to the bathroom to do a number two more than carbs,
Super
more than
pumped.
any type. I mean, come on, it's yeah, and then add a stimulant to it. We all know how that, especially as you age. Add any caffeine or a pre-workout, it's like, oh, and you're just clenching your butt cheeks to get to the bathroom. So I don't know. I went off on a tangent, which I think I've been pretty good about, but
We were waiting for it. We were waiting for the tangent.
Yeah.
We had something else too. I know we were gonna ask Andrew. We had a question related to DC. Was there something else that we were supposed to get to? I think I was gonna jump to somewhere else before we went there. Oh, here was a comment I thought was really nice. Skip jumped in on. Jonathan said, yep, my wife watches. She surprised me now and then with the knowledge that she has gained. And I was really nice. And I said, that's awesome, man. And Skip says, tell her I said hi.
Yeah, but you have to understand, I overstepped my bounds last time that I made a comment about Jimmy Dean's sausage to a guy, and I totally offended him. It was having to do with his mom. I thought hilarious, and I was mortified that he did not receive my humor the way that it was intended. So now I've had to tone it down a little bit.
I've got a segue, Scott, that because Skip started to bring up a social media post that he saw that we both kind of commented on.
I saw that one too, I think.
The post that Neil Hill had posted with a picture of Flex.
He said he never ate cereal once, right?
Never ate cereal once. He never did push-pull legs. He, let's say those were the two main things he was saying.
Sure.
And he won Mr.
The other
Olympia.
one was deadlifts.
He never deadlifted once or something like that, okay. So what my issue is that when, and I think the discussion, because then someone else, Phil Viz made a post about high level coaches and like what people in the industry associate with a high level coach. And I think that most people in our sport think of like names like Hani, they think of Chris Aceto, they think of Neil Hill, they think of all those, we'll call them tier one coaches, right? And I kind of have a problem. Gurus, Farah, Aceto, Milos, all those names, because
Amin's doing well. Sorry, that was bad. Yeah, but it got a laugh, didn't it? Thank you. That's all that mattered.
But I think you guys know where I'm going with this, because when people think of those coaches, they think, okay, they're working with Olympians, and where I'm going with that is, okay, they're high level because they can work only with they work with these top Olympians. Yeah. But could they take an average person? And I have yet to really see it. I've seen Aceto do a few. Can they take someone that looks like nobody and make them look like somebody? Because I have a problem with that high level coach, because in my mind, I think all of us are high level coaches in the sense that we work with more average people, but we bring them into great shape and we help them make
more
massive
people,
improvements.
Period.
Exactly.
More people, period.
Exactly. Because some of these high level coaches, I know for a fact, they take your money, they send you a plan, they don't respond to your emails for 3 months, and then they send you another bill for the next 3 months. Like, I can think of three or four of these guys. It happens. And I know none of us would ever do that to somebody, ghost them, take their money, and then be like, oh, by the way, it's time to re-up when it's 3 months later after not doing anything with them.
Yeah.
So my issue is, and maybe, some of our listeners and watchers can comment, what their opinion is of a high level coach. Because I put one in my story and I got a lot of good answers. And And I guess going back to the Neil Hill post, which kind of irked me a little bit, was like, okay, so you're saying,
me. I'm glad it wasn't just me.
Oh no, like, okay, so you're telling me you can work on a Ferrari, but can you work on a Toyota and get great results on a Toyota? Can you work on a Dodge and get great results on a Dodge? Because most of the people that any coach is ever going to work with are more average genetic people. They're not these top 1% genetic freaks that grow muscle, regardless of what training program you put them on, regardless of, the drugs you put them on. It just kind of irks me when a quote unquote high level coach uses their Olympian as an example. Now, if he was some Joe Blow, okay, so I'll tell someone who looks like maybe Eduardo Codrera, right? Not the best genetic guy. But I would say Chris Aceto's done a great job with him in maximizing everything he has. He's got a lot of shortcomings with his muscle bellies, brings them in peeled every time, right? I would say that's a better example of taking someone who is a little bit more on the average spectrum and turning them into a top 212 guy versus taking someone like Samson, who Milos has got a hold of, and adding 5 more pounds to his frame when the guy's a genetic. Any of those coaches, any of us could work with him and make him look the way he looks, in my opinion.
There was a time I didn't understand that, and then I worked with one of those guys, and then I was like, oh, Scott Stevenson. So he, he worked with Dave Henry through almost Dave's.
That's a good example too.
That's
a good example of taking someone from a regular and turning them into somebody.
Well, that's not what. No, I wasn't going to go that.
I understand Dave's a genetic freak, but I'm saying we know Scott.
Here's
we
what
know
Scott
his intelligence
said.
level.
Here's what Scott said. He said working with Dave Henry, he used the word Ferrari. He was like, it's like working on a Ferrari. You can just do anything you want, and it's going to work. He was like, and it's not like Scott didn't really still have to work hard with him and invest a lot, but he was like, you can push him as hard as you want, and it's not going to stop. Like it's just, it's going to work with Dave Henry because he was one of those guys, I mean, granted he had his weaknesses too, but he just like, no matter what, it's like, he couldn't go flat, he just always was what he was, which is, I mean, the dude's still competing today, it's like,
well, that's what I was talking about with Phil. Have you ever seen him flat?
Yeah.
I asked this question because we're all going to say no. And the listeners are probably thinking the same thing. So then you have 2 ways to look at it. Hani's absolutely brilliant, or Phil can't go flat. Or Phil's flat. A better way to put it is, Phil can go flat for Phil, but it's still ridiculously and absurdly full that no one can tell the difference. So we don't know.
Yeah, it's rare, but I worked with only a couple guys that are like that. Like you can get them, like even at their flattest, it's like, damn, you could still do pretty good,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to note though for the listeners, we're not coming on here to bash Neil as far as him being a trainer. That's not what Andrew's saying. That's not what I'm saying or Scott's saying.
Absolutely.
What I'm saying specifically about what irked me or what caught my attention to begin with Neil's post was the reference to the post-workout cereal. And the reason is this: the burger thing prior to a show, Matt caught me. I messaged him a couple times and I'm like, Matt, matter of fact, the one time I told him, I said, be careful that you're not disrespecting the people who came before you. And he was like, that's not what I meant. And when he explained it, I understood. And what he explained was, it's the other people, the wannabe coaches who take what you did and what other people have done, and then they use it as their method. Like they have come up with it, and it's so popular now and it's used by so many people because it is arguably so effective that now it becomes laughable. And I told him, I totally get that, but here's what you have to understand from my perspective. When someone like you, Matt Porter, posts something like that, maybe think of all the people that I have worked with, and they may think that you're saying that that's a bad idea. And he said, he goes, I didn't think about it that way. And it was done and gone, and it wasn't an issue. Yeah. So
Matt's a very introspective and intelligent guy. So
absolutely. Yeah. And that's with Neil. I want to say this. I'm not sure the context, and I posted this. I'm not sure the context that he was making. He may not have been bad-mouthing it. I may have been just assuming that because the trend now is to bash these things like the post-workout cereal or burgers and, peeking for a show, it may not have been that. It may have just been him saying he doesn't do deadlifts and yet look at his back. Yeah. He doesn't do push-pull legs. And this is the one that kind of push-pull legs is about, who can slam push-pull legs? But he doesn't do it. He doesn't do that. And he's still, and the same with the cereal, obviously. He might be saying, Flex didn't do these things that everybody else yet he created a world-class physique. My argument would be he's a genetic anomaly. So like you said, Andrew, he can do everything different from everybody else. Phil Heath, I never saw the guy pull a dead ever in his life. Quite frankly,
I never saw him do a real squat.
Train that hard. He would make noise. He would make noise when my camera came on for the longevity DV. And I turned around and looked at him and I went, the camera's not even on. And he laughed. So it's one of those things where, the Paul Dillettes of the world and the Phil Heaths, it's not that they don't train hard. It's not that they're not deserving of where they are. But I do insist that people look closer at the genetic component, because there are a lot of people thousands and thousands, arguably tens of thousands of people who have done everything right and will never threaten for a pro card. Never.
This goes back to our conversations we've had about how some guys can do fantastic with a little bit of gear. Exact same conversation.
Absolutely.
It really
and
is.
it's also why it's hard for anyone to believe, because who wants to admit in their heart of hearts that it doesn't have to do with a work ethic or being consistent and just banging and outworking the guy, outworking the other competitor or the guy next to you in the gym. None of us want to believe that. Hell, if I believed that, I'd have spent 2 years in bodybuilding and went, you know what? You're right. I suck at this. And I would have gone and done something else. There is a massive, massive genetic component. Yet at the same time, I've written a lot of articles about this, and I always make the analogy of a poker hand. We all are dealt our 2 cards in the hole. You still have the flop, you still have the turn, you still have the river. You have to play it out, because in the end, if you play your cards right, you can beat the ace king in the hole. It's just that they have such an advantage going in, but you don't know what's going to happen over a course of time. Shelby Starnes, I always use him as an example. No one would have ever thought that these guys are going to they're going to be pros. If he would have told me he was a pro the first year he started training, I'd been like, yep, next in line. Because I've heard that a million times over, but he did. And some people think, well, he outworked shitty genetics. No, he had the genetics to get there. He just had to kill it, and he had to play his cards right, and he had to put in the time, and he had to bang consistently for a long time, and he got there.
Yeah.
And push-pull legs did
so
work
well
for him.
said. Yeah.
No kidding. Yeah.
Skip, that was so
I almost said no S.
All right.
But, the bigger issue, though, well, I was just going to say the bigger issue is I just hate when these quote unquote high level coaches that people associate with that term throw out these things without the glaring, you have a top 0.5% genetic freak in your stable. Okay. Like, let's start with that. And then anything after that, like, we'll take that with a small grain of salt.
Yeah. He could do hypers and get erectors like that. Now, he's still working hard. He's still putting in the time. He's still banging. I'm not taking anything away from the guy. Flex is a cool guy. Let's see, Arnold. We were going to the Arnold. We were on the same flight because we left out of Fort Lauderdale, and we were the only 2 clowns who landed in early March in Ohio with shorts on, and we laughed about it, knowing full well no one's going to understand we just came from Fort Lauderdale and it was freezing. But the point is, he's a nice guy. I'm not taking anything away from him. What I don't like is when trainers don't understand that when they post something, especially high level trainers like that, without meaning to, it's kind of condescending, and it's a shot sometimes at people who are still good trainers that don't do what you do because you don't have to do it, or those things don't necessarily work for the genetic freaks. And it is day and night. We all know this, working with a genetic freak versus the average person who is fighting for every 5 pounds of muscle, or is fighting to get ripped, or fighting to get their glutes or lower back ripped when everything else is ready to go.
All right, moving on here. For BSG, this is also from Patreon. Thank you very much, Jonathan. He says, I've heard pros mention that sometimes they stop losing fat during prep and have to switch things up. Is it just the rate of loss they mean, or does the loss really stop? Is it possible for pro bodybuilders to hit a true wall in fat loss? With all the aid of PEDs, so much muscle mass in training, does metabolic adaptation still occur? Thanks for your support.
I like that question.
Well, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, metabolic adaptation absolutely can happen to anybody, but I think with some of these freaks, you got a much longer window or much longer road to drive before you hit some of those walls. I mean, everyone has genetic strengths. You have more average genetic people that also have a propensity to burn fat very easily. You know, like we all have some clients that you would have to struggle to make them fat in the off season, right? Mm-hmm. But then you also have the other end of the spectrum where you have fast muscle gainers, but then for them to get in shape, you got to start the diet at 30 weeks out and you got to be on them from day one. So, I mean, everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses as we talk about more average people, especially, but Yeah, I mean, if you took a bodybuilder that was eating 5,000 calories a day and you jumped them down to 1,000 calories a day, eventually they're absolutely going to hit a wall in terms of metabolic adaptation. It's just how the thyroid works. Absolutely, the body wants to hold on to what it has. Just like it's hard to go from, let's say, 200 pounds if you've been 200 pounds your whole life and you've been eating to be 200 pounds to try to get to 220. You know, it's almost as hard to get to 220 as it is to get down to 160.
There's pros and there's everyone else. And people are pros not just because it's not a shoulder to waist ratio. It's not the shape of their muscles. It's not the fact that they get lean and shredded. It's not the fact that they put on muscle easier than everybody else, utilize gear and respond to gear better than everybody else. It's all those things together.
I was like,
it's
wait, I think it is that and that and that.
When you're a pro, you don't hold fat in your lower back when you're ready to go everywhere else. It's not common. There are exceptions to the rule, but the very vast majority, that was redundant. The vast majority of people, the vast majority of pros have those pro traits and those pro qualities. That's why they're pros. They still have to work hard. But the difference between the pros and the rest of us, or us mere mortals, is we'll work our asses off, sometimes equally as hard, sometimes harder, and not be able to get into that same condition that pros are able to get into, or not be able to put on the muscle that pros are able to get into. It's not like, oh, there's amateurs and then the line is so close to pro. There's amateurs, and amateurs are down here around the 2 mark, and then there's pros and they're up at the 12 mark. There is this huge disparity between the two. The only thing you could argue is the people who are amateurs and they're on their way to being pros. But again, going back to the Dusty or the Shelbys or the people, they fought and they got there. But how long did it take? The road was
a lot longer.
Yeah.
And I still say that those guys will work harder than the large majority of pros. We hear these stories all the time, and Phil is just so easy. He's such an easy example for me to use because I knew him so well, and I knew him when he was coming up from his first show, and I watched the whole thing take place. That's why I was so supportive of him on the boards and got blasted when everybody who had been at that level for 10 plus years was saying, oh, he doesn't have a back. He sucks. He didn't, even Chris Havakos, loved the guy, but Chris Havakos was at that level in Colorado for a while, and Phil surpassed him and everybody else, the rest of us in Colorado, in a year. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants it to happen. It's hard to be supportive of that until it does happen. And then even Chris was like, oh, did it again. He's good. I can't take anything from him. Eventually you come around and you understand that they're just on a different level. And I will tell you this, Phil did not work Chris. He did not work Chris if you took any 5 years that Phil was at the Olympia versus 5 years that Chris was an amateur, and I'm just using these, and people don't know who they are, but I'm using it. Chris could be anybody. Okay. He didn't outwork him. No. He didn't do it longer. He didn't do it any harder. And yet he reigned for years and is arguably one of the best bodybuilders on the planet ever. Hallelujah.
I think that another direction here to look at too is I don't know whether Jonathan is a competitor or not, but I think sometimes when we hear a competitor, be it a pro or an amateur, say, hey, things weren't working, I had to switch it up. There's a timing factor with doing a contest where, let's say you're just doing like a, hey, I want to get in shape type, your non-competitor, diet. Well, if things aren't moving as fast, it's not going to be as critical. But if you have 7 weeks and you're trying to time it up to make sure that you're on point to be there, then maybe that's where things are like a little bit more critical, that we make the changes when we need to make them. You know what I mean?
Sure. And methods will sometimes stop working, and you do need to mix things up. There are times where, and I'm sure you guys have done it, where you've got calories low, things are slowing down, you refeed, you skip load, whatever. You do these things, you add cardio, and the progress doesn't seem to be there, and you increase calories, and all of a sudden the calories in the regular diet, and then all of a sudden the metabolism is taking over. There's a huge component that is misunderstood about prep dieting, and even for some people who struggle to get fat loss, max fat loss who don't compete. And that is, Sometimes you have to bury the metabolism
Yes.
and then build it by adding calories. And people struggle with that concept because it seems so counterintuitive.
They start
Adding
counting
calories
calories.
make me leaner. Sure.
They start
adding
counting calories.
You're
Like,
going to add carbs.
12 weeks out. They're like
Right.
12 weeks out. They're like, but I'm only eating this many calories now. What's going to happen later?
Right.
I'd say I don't know. I can't. I don't have a crystal ball. Like because like we talked about last episode, the post show phase being reactive. Well, prep is just as reactive too, right? I mean, how many times do you got them on a plan? They're losing 2 pounds a week. Everything's going good. Your check-ins are so easy. You're like, great, awesome, keep going, no changes. And then you have like 2 check-ins in a row where they're either up weight or they're looking softer or whatever it might be. Absolutely, you got to make changes. I think sometimes people think that like you start a diet, that diet's going to be the one you're on from point A to point B to get there. And as you do more and more preps as a competitor, you're going to find, oh, wow, we made 15 diet changes this prep, or we made 25 diet changes this prep, including, refeeds or complete diet changes in terms of, pulling carbs and increasing fats or whatever it might be. And that's where, a good, diet technician or a coach comes in handy because they can see those things. They've had experience working with other people in those situations, and they have maybe not the one thing that they need to do, but they have in their back of their mind, okay, there's probably 3 or 4 things we can do here. I think this is the most common route or this is the most advantageous route for this person. They put them on there. If that's not working, okay, we're going to go with a different route. So there's a lot of that inner dialogue that goes on inside a coach's head when they're, looking at a client's plan, looking at the client's progress, analyzing how many weeks out we are, or how many weeks they need to be in contest shape. So there's all these different things that are going on through your mind as a coach and as a competitor. And you just got to be able to extrapolate and wade through that information.
Agreed.
And as a client, you need to trust the reason that you went with that trainer to begin with. And if you don't trust them, you got to wonder why you went with them.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, because when someone looks at our Instagram pages or, our websites with the, hundreds of clients that we've gotten in shape, you should feel pretty confident that, okay, like if I'm not getting in shape with this person, first, am I doing something wrong? Am I miscounting something? Am I doing something wrong as an athlete? But B, or is there just something wrong with this prep? Meaning the coach has tried all these different things. Maybe it's just not going to work this time. That's very rare. But like, I mean, I can tell you right now, I've had to pull people out over the years where it's like, nothing we're doing is working right now. We need to like rebuild and start over and look at a different contest.
I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to our supporters. Thank you to the people who have helped us make this show continue to come out several times per week. So number one, thank you to our Patreon subscribers. And if you know one of our Patreon subscribers, you can thank them directly because they're the biggest driving force right now that's helping to support this show. If you want to take part in Patreon, we could use all the help we can get. We vote with our dollars, and I want to say thank you to everybody who has voted for us. Also, I want to say thank you to our advertisers. You guys have directly supported what you're doing. You believe in us, and I only work with advertisers that I believe in too. Shopping with them is shopping with us. Use our code THINK at True Nutrition, shop with STROM Sports Nutrition in the UK, and shop with SupplementSource.ca in Canada. I'm happy to talk and give you insight on any of their products, or if I don't know, I can direct you to somebody that will. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and thank you for all your support. Let's get back to the programming. All right. John has one. He says, longtime listener and Andrew's old client. Ranieri?
Great history too.
He fired you, Andrew. I'll be damned.
He did. He's actually, John's a good coach himself now. He coaches a bunch of athletes, both competitors and non-competitors. And he looked really good. I saw him at Eastern USA's. He didn't come in the way he wanted to because I think the coach he had at the time did something where they had done it before and it completely flopped, and he made him do it again, even though he was reminding him, hey, coach, we did this. This is the look it gave us. It wasn't good. And but then he went on to nationals and he looked pretty good.
Okay. Well, let's see if this ties in because it's about contest prep. He says, was wondering each of your thoughts on when trying to make a weight class judgment, how much should you be typically over the cap before deciding to diet down? Let's say for a national show, for example. If you want to make middles and make the first call out prep, should you start at, say, 220?
So saying how heavy should you be maybe before you get into a show for a particular weight class? Because That varies big time, because let's say you're someone that doesn't get like John Meadows, for example, the guy, like I say this all the time, but he started a contest prep in the kind of shape most competitors will get into on stage, if you know what I mean. Like, he was peeled. So for him, his variation in weight was like 3 to 5 pounds for a diet. Right. Whereas, excuse me, you'll see a lot of, I've seen this too. And I think Gary Turner's talked about this. This Gary was a heavyweight at like 223, 224 for North Americans in 2020. He had been as high as like 315 in the off season leading up to that. And I think that was when he realized, I just can't do that anymore. It's not producing positive gains for me on stage. And then I think he stayed much tighter after that. And he's been a super heavyweight ever since then, and a good super heavyweight. He made first call out, I believe, at North Americans and USA's that year in 2021.
Yeah, so, he looked his best then too.
I agree. He did.
We had him on the show. We had him on the show. We talked about that. Yeah.
Yep.
He used the 220 mark. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I said enough. You go ahead.
Well, I say the 220. He used the 220 mark for the middleweight, and the cutoff being 176. So, my response would be this: some guys can be at 220 and make the cutoff and look crazy, and other guys will start at 220 and they'll struggle to get to 176. And not look over dieted and have a hard time filling them out and peaking them. So it's incredibly random. There isn't a ceiling to say, oh, that's big. I would say this: if I had a middleweight who was, say, below the national level and they were 220 and they had to come in at 176, I'd be like, we got work to do, bro. Like, we got a lot of work to do and we need to get on it. Yeah. Right now,
that's a 30-week prep,
don't have any time to lose. Yeah, we have no time to lose. Like, this is it. We needed to start yesterday.
Can I think what John's really asking here is, when you are, let's say you're looking really good at 180, but the middleweight cutoff is 176. Do you make that decision to stay as a light heavy because that's your best look?
That's what I initially thought.
Because I know, because we've talked about this. Because we've talked about this. Yeah.
What would that cutoff be? Like, how many pounds over the weight class are you think he's saying? Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's what he's really asking, because we kind of had that discussion the night before the show when he wasn't really happy with, I think, the program he was running into the show, the protocol going into the show. And again, I think that's a judgment call, because if you have an athlete that no matter what you do, they don't go flat, I think you absolutely push for the middleweights, right? Because they just don't go flat. The muscles around, like a Phil Heath type of physique, like you said, his flat is something that we can't even see. We can't even tell because he's still full.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're somebody that the minute you are a pound lighter than your best weight, whether it's fluid loss or glycogen depletion, and you look like a completely different athlete, you look stringy.
Yeah.
I mean, like myself, that's a case where you go with your best look. You go with your best look, whether it's 180, you stay with that 180, I think, and you write it in, and you take your chances in the light heavy. And I'll say this, because a lot of people are so obsessed with weight. As an amateur, most of the time, I was the lightest super heavyweight in my classes, but I was also the most peeled super heavyweight in my classes. And I never lost the super heavyweight class because we brought that conditioning, and because of that, and I looked at the pictures because I'd analyze them, because I was like, man, this guy's got 20 pounds on me. How'd I beat this guy at 240 and he's 260 or 259 or something? When you are bone dry, peeled and full, you will look just as big as someone that's 20 pounds and a little less conditioned. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the fullness, the shape, the illusion of it, you will look every bit as big as that person next to you. So I say always go with your best look, unless you're one of those genetic freaks that never loses its fullness.
And the guy who lost to you, and he was 260 or 250, he's still complaining about it on social media because he was so much bigger than you. But the reality is you outworked him, and there's nothing more disappointing to me. I don't care what the level of the show, when people have the muscle and the shape and they cannot do the work in that class, sometimes in the heavies too. Well, sometimes in all classes. But I see it more in the super heavy. That is such a size. And those guys at that level and that size, they cannot stand to lose 3 pounds. So they are seeing themselves in much better condition than the mirror is actually telling them they are. And then they can't figure out why they don't win. The other thing that I think needs to be mentioned about the what weight class to go in when it comes down to the wire those last couple weeks is the level of the show and how the show is set up based on the weigh-in versus when you're going to get on stage. A weigh-in the night before and getting on stage the next day is completely different than a national show where you might have 2.5 days to fill out.
True.
I mean, you could get, I'll put it out here. I in a situation where I have 2.5 days, I do want to pull most people down because I'll get you dry and then I'll load you and fill you out and add fluid back. And you're not going to lose condition. You're just going to get better and better over those 2.5 days. That's a completely different story than if you have to weigh in. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when competing was weighing in the morning of the show, and you were pretty much like,
me too.
Yeah, you had to be ready to go. It's also different. I think you guys would agree. It's different at the national level because you've got guys who are arguably almost 20 pounds heavier in those bigger weight classes, but they only suck down to get into those classes. So then they go pro and everybody's like, oh, he gained 25 pounds. Well, he may not have. He may have just not done the ridiculous and absurd things that he needed to do to get underneath the cutoff for that weight class.
All right, let's just play a game. And this is completely fictional. So let's say you had to weigh in the morning of, which nobody does anymore, and it's not a national show then. And you got to make
Steve's shows, a lot of Steve shows up here in the Northeast, you still weigh in the morning.
Do you still?
Show.
Okay.
At like
it's a long day.
Yeah.
Between 8 and 9 a.m. And then your prejudging is either 10 or 11 a.m.
So you got a middleweight. Okay. He's 177. Would you make the decision to say, hey, yeah, let's go to 176? This is I got multiple questions here. Would it be worth it for the 1 pound to weigh in?
Okay, so I think all of us are coaches at the level where we can talk to the promoter and be like, hey, how many middleweights you got? How many light heavies you got? Like, we can play that game and get a little insight as to like, oh, is the light heavy in shape? No? Okay, I'm staying light heavy. You know what I mean? I think you can play that game a little bit. But I think all of us knowing that like they're really close, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think all of us would like to have that person at 176 like 2 days before, ride it out so that they're so insulin sensitive and ready to load that at the minute you weigh in, you can start feeding them. So it's not like a suck down. You get what I'm saying?
So 177, you can work with it. That was my first question. 178. What I'm getting at is where do we draw the? See where I'm going? See what I'm saying? Where do we draw the line? You know what I mean on that?
Yeah, I get your point, and I think it's a good point. But if it's a few pounds, I'm going to do it because I think that the change. But again, we may use different methods too. Where if I'm let's say this. Okay, let's throw something else in here. I say yes if it's a few pounds. I might even go as high as. I don't want to know if I want to go that high. But the point being is, if you're going to get them down and then you're going to load them, the loading that I would do, I have to take into consideration something else too because of the loading method I use. If they are prone to distension, then I have to take that into consideration because I can't throw off the shoulder to waist ratio and have them potentially distended from loading. So if people can handle loading, like let's say it's a Phil Viz type guy with a smaller waist. Oh yeah. And I would even use, Manny as an example, with the 212, I would definitely have done it with him because he can handle larger amounts of food and he will assimilate them and his condition will change very, very quickly in say a matter of a couple hours. And that's really, what do you need? You need a couple hours.
Yeah.
Depends on the person again.
How about this? What's the most you pulled off of somebody? Let's say the weigh-in was like, let's say it's a Saturday show, national show. Friday morning was the weigh-ins for the men, like at 10 a.m.
What level show?
National. Let's say North Americans. Okay.
Okay.
Or just what's the most you pulled off of someone in a night? I guess we can say a night.
I will tell you this. I have heard numbers from Matt and they always made me uncomfortable. I was not as aggressive as he was, but I could, now it depends on the weight class too, but let's just say it's a light heavy. I would, if I had to, if I saw someone that I thought you just have to be here. It's the difference between winning and potentially getting, seventh. I almost said your A beat, but I caught myself. See, I'm getting better. So, which has no impact when you're getting your A beat. But anyway, if I have to, I would pull. Man, I'd pull 8-ish. When you start to get up around 10, I'm getting a little nervous.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little nervous because that has such an impact. But again, national level, you're pulling it, and then you have the time to go back for a couple days. So that's
in this case, I'm
different.
saying you had the rest of Friday to fill it, because I actually have a real world situation, and you guys might be like, "Holy crap, how'd you do?"
Okay,
that?
so weighing in Friday morning.
Friday morning, the show's on Saturday morning. Yeah.
Depending on the person, I could get a little bit more aggressive with that. I thought we were going national show weigh in the morning. And even though that doesn't happen, it was still, the point of, okay. But yeah, I mean, 8 to 10 pounds, getting up there higher, it's going to depend on the person and how they're going to respond.
How about on a lightweight?
So lightweight 159. That's going to be obviously different.
154.
Okay, so it's going to be a different story.
Okay. What's the most you think you could pull off somebody?
So I would say this for a guy that was bigger, I was thinking light heavy to a smaller heavy. I would say I'd feel comfortable with 7 pounds. Like I'd feel comfortable with that. And I feel like I try to play stuff. I brand the rules.
I love when he screws up.
I try to play things really conservative. So I think the time that I pulled the most was with that guy, classic competitor Joe Russo. And I know I told you about this, Andrew, where he needed to be 200 to get on stage in classic. And it was under 2 weeks out, he was at like 222, and we were eating like just fish and veggies.
See, that's
at that time.
hard.
And we'd been doing that for a while. Dude, we went to the gym together, and when we went out, because I didn't see him in person every day, but I did see him in person. We were standing outside of the gym, and he was chewing gum, and I was looking at the striations in his cheek dance that day, and that was 2 weeks out at 222.
He's already in shape.
So yeah, he was ready to go, and what I ended up doing was we like basically had to starve him in so I could get him close enough, and then I think maybe we pulled like 5-6 pounds at the end to get him to make weight. But we still that was like Wednesday for, Friday show. So I would say if I'm saying a heavier guy, 7 pounds, I might feel comfortable with a lightweight at 4, honestly.
So not 13 and a half.
Did you do 13 and a half?
I figured you were going to be over 10.
Me too. Me too.
So the reason why, I'll give you a reason why, because this guy was doing.
Because there are always variables and it's always individual.
He was competing in both classic and open bodybuilding.
Okay. Yeah.
And we had a day to fill out, which I wasn't too worried about because he didn't really ever go flat. But yeah, we sucked off a little more than 13 pounds off him. And I'll say we only used one diazide, 25 milligrams. And he won the double pro card. He got the classic and he got the lightweight bodybuilding, which was pretty freaking
What's his name?
Should I say it? Because I did say.
Oh yeah, never mind. I was going to give him a shout out.
Let me ask you.
He wouldn't mind. Actually, he wouldn't mind. His name is Hemorrhage Malai. He's from Aruba, and that's one of the only shows that people from outside of the country can compete in, the North Americans, which is why we had to do that one.
Yeah,
and because he was doing classic as well, that's why we had to we had to get him down to that weight limit, and we had to basically make sure he made the lightweight class as well. So
what time did you had to weigh in on Friday, compete on Saturday?
I believe it was like he was on stage probably around 2:00 on Saturday.
And then what time did you weigh in on Friday? Like afternoon?
I want to say it was between 2 and 4.
Okay. So what was the game plan then after you guys made weight? And what did he weigh? Like how close was he?
Oh, like 153.9.
Okay.
Right where you want him to be to make weight,
that year with Joe, I went out there with him. We brought a scale with us. We literally, because like a 5-hour drive, 6-hour drive to Chicago. So we literally went into like a truck stop bathroom and he peeled down and we weighed him and we're like, okay, you can have a little bit of water.
Yeah, you can have a sip of water.
Yeah.
I had this guy literally, we were doing sauna sessions like all day. Because I don't like to use, you guys know, I don't like to use a lot of diuretics, and not that the sauna is that much safer than, but we did use, we alternated 20-minute sauna sessions with 10-minute cold showers and then repeat and then do it again. And we did that, chewing gum, spitting all your spit out. If we gave him any food, it was like an ounce of chicken and like a piece of broccoli, just to hold his hunger over enough.
Yeah.
And I think we did a lot of caffeine just to try to control his hunger with stimulants that day. So he probably didn't feel very good, but he looked amazing, and it worked.
Let me ask you this. Had he gone into, because I know you would have paid attention like I did. Had he gone into the higher weight class, Would he have still got the pro card?
I don't think so.
I
don't. Well, I'm trying to remember who won the. I can't remember that. This is back in 2016 or 2017, but I remember at the time being like, okay, this was a good move because he also got to do the classic, because I think that the classic number was 154 as well for his height. Okay. So we knew that was the magic number that we had to hit. And because otherwise I probably would have thrown him in the next class up, but I think that, and I probably still would have done the lightweights because it was just what he had competed in. How
bad did he rebound?
No, he was good. I mean, he was maybe
good.
I think we probably put him on stage, at 161, 162, and then like the following week, I think he was only up to like. Actually, I think he was lighter. I think he was back down to like 157 or something. This guy was like dedicated, like on the program, doing.
Well, the reason I asked that is because someone like yourself, and I'm sure all three of us, we would be careful, maybe even more careful, coming off of a show like that, knowing what is in store if you just go off the rails. And it can get very, very dangerous, and just it can be not good on all the bodily system.
Sure. That's a good point. And I think we probably all like have that discussion with people if we use any type of diuretics or any type of drastic water drop situation that, hey, like we need to treat the post show, especially these first 3-4 days, just like we did leading into this. We're going to do micro changes. We're not, we'll do a free meal the night after the show. And then I want you to get up and do cardio, and we're going to do probably a lower carb day and maybe one more free meal for dinner. And then we're back on your Monday.
And really prepare them like beforehand, you're saying. Right?
Yeah. But I mean, with someone who's doing a national level show, who's done several national level shows, and who also just got their pro card, I think like that mindset of like, okay, like I can stick with the program another 5 weeks and really ease out of this type of condition versus letting it all go. So
suppositories, everything.
You said
I've done that with somebody.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You said
it's either that or you get in there with a fork and dig it out.
Not a spoon, a fork.
One of those old. I know exactly. I was gonna go with spork, and it would have been funnier, but nonetheless,
good. Anyway, spork would have been funny. Very specific, like it's something you've done. You know what I mean? At that point. So he competed. How long ago was this? This was a 16. You said
2016 or 17. I remember.
Has he competed since?
Oh yeah, he's done several pro shows. Yeah,
good for him.
He got second or third at the Masters. What's it called? The Masters Worlds in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
I think the year after that, because he's a smaller classic guy. He's done. Let's see, we've done Tampa. I think. What else did we do? He might have even done Tampa when I did it last year. Now that I think about it. But there was 40 something guys. It's so you get lost in the shuffle there. But yeah, no, he's done well since then. He runs his personal training and coaching business down in Aruba still, and I think very successful. We haven't connected since then, but I think in the last year or two. But if he ever wants to compete again, I think he knows. I think he'll call me.
We got one more here. Got time for one more. Actually, we had more. Guys, if we didn't get to your question, please comment again. We'd love to get to them, but we just out of time. Macy Clark, one of the several female listeners. We had a bunch of ladies. You asked for the females to comment, and in fact, like I think, where was this? We had even like, look at this, 2 back-to-back from T and Paige. They're both like, hey, we're female listeners. So there's a bunch of them. She said, question for the next Blood, Sweat, and Gear. I want your opinions on when you look at increasing protein versus carbs and fats. I've traditionally only been around 4 ounces across 6 meals in prep and off season. The only time my protein was ever increased was many years ago, and it was increased to 6-ounce portions across 5 meals. I believe it would have worked out well, but my carbs got so high so quickly, in addition to the higher proteins, that it ruined my digestion. Do y'all see many women under 140 pounds ever work better with higher amounts of protein and keeping carbs and fats more moderate as a strength in adding tissue?
Okay, so
basically,
so when to increase protein versus carbs and fats?
Yeah.
Is that basically the overall gist?
Absolutely.
With a female competitor. So, I mean, I feel like guys' protein intakes for the most part are fairly consistent with weight class in general. overall, across the board. Women, I find a little bit more variety. Like I'll have a lot of women somewhere in the 140, 145 range of grams of protein per day. I've got several women that we get up as high as 200 grams. And I think the biggest driver for that is digestion. And the other thing I want to point out about protein, and I know Justin Harris pointed this out like 20 years ago, that we think of protein as just building muscle, but the vast majority of your protein gets burned as energy. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because if you do the math on it, let's say you're just eating 100 grams of protein, 365 days a year, that's, 3,650 grams of protein. If you do that weight into math, you didn't put on that much, that same amount of muscle. You know what I mean? So a gram of protein in your intake does not equal a gram of protein accumulation in terms of muscle mass.
Absolutely.
So where does it go? Right? Where does it go? It's burned as energy through gluconeogenesis. So I think that's the important thing to remember, that, increasing protein doesn't necessarily mean it's going to increase your muscle mass. And in a lot of cases, it might be a detriment to your muscle mass because of the effects on your digestion. Okay. But in terms of like increasing protein, I think, coming out of a show, I think I want to increase carbs because usually those are the ones that we've been deficient in the longest. I want to increase fats a little bit because those usually don't fall to nothing, but they're also deficient compared to their off season. And then once we get to that point, I do start to increase protein a little bit, but it's not like a 4 ounce to a 6 ounce portion. It might be 4 to 4.5 ounce portions, or it might mean like, I guess I call it like sneaking calories in. Like instead of a 3 ounce chicken meal, maybe we go to like a 25 gram Greek yogurt meal, which adds an extra 4 grams of protein. And you do that, across the board. Instead of 3/4 of a cup of egg whites, now you're going with like, a whole egg and a whole cup of eggs as the diet progresses in the off season. So it's just these micro changes of protein. In terms of like when to do it, I find it just kind of happens as a result of the diet changes, because no athlete or very few people can stay on the same exact 6 meals for the rest of their lives, sure. Especially in the off season. You get to a point where you're like, hey, 4 meals of chicken and rice a day just aren't working for me anymore. So, okay, what can we do? I call it adding fun foods, right? So like I gave you an example about my pre-workout meal using some Greek yogurt, whey protein, and granola. That goes down so easy. It tastes good. It covers the same amount of macros that the chicken and rice I would have had. And it's more palatable. So I enjoy it. I digest it better. And I'm ready to go train when I want to go train. So I think you kind of make those decisions, and protein goes up as a side effect, not necessarily as a purpose, I guess. It's more of a side effect of the diet changes you're making overall.
And I think her question too was based or asked more around the fact that she's female. So I would ask other questions. Gear use, no gear use. If gear use, what gear use?
I think she put that in there.
What division are you? Did she? What division are you competing in? I'm sorry?
She's women's physique.
Okay, physique.
I met her at the Nationals.
Okay. So these things factor into. I'm going to go on record as saying this. I don't care that a woman is, or that a client is female or male. It doesn't carry much. The division, the gear use, their amount of muscle mass, that factors. And I'm not saying that you do, Andrew. I'm just saying I'm going on record as saying that it doesn't matter to me. As an example, a guy who would have the same or roughly the same body composition as a female, as far as protein intake and stuff like that, aside from other variables that may be in there too, it may be comparable. Increasing, I completely agree with you that there isn't anything that I can think of with myself and my clients that would be black and white where I look and go, oh yeah, protein needs to be increased right now. Yeah. It's almost kind of a gut feeling, which is funny because this needs to be mentioned. I think a lot of experienced coaches, in my opinion, and I know it sounds like a little bit of a cop-out, but there are gut feeling and those gut feelings are based on your experience without you sitting there and methodically thinking, okay, this and that because of that. We don't do that. It's kind of like judging. We don't go, oh, the biceps, his biceps are just so much better. I got to give him 2 points here. It's a total thing that just registers in your brain. And because of your experience, whether it's good or not, or whether it fits together. And I don't think it's any different when it comes to coaching, as far as dieting is concerned. These are things that sometimes I struggle to explain.
The analogy,
I can explain it from a logic standpoint, but
I get what you're saying, Skip.
The analogy I use is, if you were in the car, and say you're an experienced driver and you've got a newbie driver in the passenger seat, there are times that you can tell them why you changed lanes. But sometimes, a lot of times, you're not even thinking about it. You're just changing lanes because you know that that's the best thing to do, and it's based off of your level of experience as a driver.
Yep, very good
It's
comparison.
A good one.
Yeah,
I can think of one situation where you would want to increase protein, and that's if someone is really hungry, but you do not want to increase the other macronutrients. And because protein has a much more satiety effect, satiating effect than carbohydrates and fats would. So, maybe increasing a gram or an ounce of protein several meals a day will help starve off that hunger and allow them to continue to progress in the diet. Because we also know that protein, the energy burned to digest and transport protein is more than the energy burned to digest and transport carbohydrates and fats. So there is a thermogenic effect of protein as well. So I think maybe that might kind of play into it a little bit when, when someone is like, hey, like I'm starving. Yeah. Not necessarily as a true contest prep, because in a true contest prep, you're like,
it is what it is.
Then go have a cup of water or something, sorry, like I'm not going to change my diet based off your hunger level. But, maybe a general client, a general population person, they're like, man, I'm just starving all day. Things are going pretty well. You're like, okay, well, let's increase, 15 grams of protein throughout the day and see if we can get away with that versus adding more, bulk carbs or something like that.
And you know what I've noticed too, and I don't know if you guys would agree with this or not, but I feel like if we look at carbs, fats, and proteins, I feel like adding, as long as it digests well, adding more protein is probably going to have the least negative effect on the physique. Like we're not likely going to we overdid it and now you're fat because we added some extra protein, versus carbs or fats, maybe not the same story.
Yeah, err on the side of protein, because it's going to be used as glucose if you need it. Where carbs are not going to be used as protein if you need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great analogy. I also sometimes, though, and you guys might do this too, like if we're stalled out on a diet, I might pull like 20 grams of protein and replace it with 20 grams of carbs. And it does have an effect in terms of fat loss quite often in helping person progress. So, So I think it's that intuition that Skip was going to, and your analogy of kind of, well, I'm switching lanes here, and I can't really explain to you why. My intuition just tell me that's the right thing to do, and that's the way of the road, and that's what we're doing.
Kamal said that when he first met Chris Aceto, when we interviewed him the other week, that it was early on. He'd reached out to Chris, and he's like, yeah, I don't know if you remember me, and he said, I'm not making the progress I want to. What do you suggest I do? Showed him his diet, and Chris was like, bring your protein down. And he's like, that's what I did. And he was like, boom, got what I wanted out of it.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Justin Harris talking about the conversion of protein, because it was years ago that I
remember everything.
Yeah, he was and then you'll remember this too. He was very adamant that it is, and in fact, I'm pretty sure I got this from him, because I still think about this on occasion, that the protein can be too high. And as soon as you may lower fats and you may lower carbs, but then you make the change of lowering protein and all of a sudden everything kicks in. And, but yet at the same time, there's nothing or very few things that will make a client more nervous closing in on a show than when you drop their protein.
True.
They think they're just they just feel like Pac-Man's coming in and is just going to eat up all their muscle dots in the next week or two.
And generally it was like the one thing they could depend on when you changed everything else. Right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Because typically protein's going to be static almost from, day one of the diet within, the trace proteins that are in carbs and fats and fat sources. But your 6 ounces or 8 ounces of chicken and your whatever steak and your protein, that's pretty much static all the way through. Yeah. But how about this? Because I know I could never, ever follow a Chad Nichols diet plan, because I don't know if you guys have ever seen them, but like there's like 5 12-ounce steak or chicken meals per day. And like, I mean, okay, you know, maybe I did do this kind of when I was younger because I didn't count macros or anything like that. But like, you know, I talk to guys that are in their 30s that work with Chad Nichols, and you know, they're like, oh, dude, this diet is killing me. Like, you know, I'm eating 600 grams of protein a day. I'm eating, you know, whatever carbs, because there's still high carbs and high fats as well, but they're eating like 600. I know personally, digestively, I just couldn't handle that.
Well, when you were talking about eating more food in the on your non-training days, I was going to say this, but there was so much going on, I decided not to. That Ron Partlow has talked about when he worked with Chad for a prep. He said he has never eaten as much food and to bulk and grow as he did when he worked with Chad, and that Chad had him doing that. That his or his non-training days were so high because he literally couldn't train with how much food he had in his stomach.
I believe it. I believe it. But then I wonder, is the efficiency of the diet not that good? Meaning, like, if you can get a guy to grow off 350 grams of protein progressively, why do we need to have that extra 250 grams in there?
Well, you take a pro like Ronnie, that you can't, you know, you can do anything with.
You can do anything with them. So it looks good.
You can take a guy like Chad. You're going to test those limits.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
True.
You really are.
Yeah, I don't think Chad's working with the average person.
Well, yeah, because then it gets back to the guys I'm talking about that work with Chad are average guys, right? Yeah. And they're not making Ronnie gains. No, you know, no offense to them, and they know that, you know. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it goes back to our argument about pros can assimilate food, they can assimilate gear, they can assimilate muscle at a much better and faster rate than the rest of us.
We have to watch it, I think, in the off season sometimes, because I've seen it myself where I've pushed somebody too hard that it was more food than their body was willing to process, just because. And you know where it's been? I've done it a couple times with people that I've worked with longer term, and we've just decided, like, you know what? Let's really push this off season and see what happens, you know, see what happens if we really go for more. And the lesson I had learned out of those 2 times is that, you know, that we do, as normal humans, we do have our limits. You could take a guy like Ronnie, or, you know, a guy like Dusty. I think that's where he excels. Dusty could eat a lot and he could still just assimilate it. I don't think that everybody can do that. And sometimes we have to respect that our bodies are only going to grow so fast as mortal humans, you know?
And at the same time, you don't know until you try either.
Exactly.
So you came away with that client, you know, after doing it a couple times going, okay, this doesn't work. But at least you went down that path to find out, because maybe he would have been able to assimilate more food had you not tried.
Yeah. And it's still on the table. You know what I mean? As something that, it's not. I'm not saying I would never do it again, but it, you know, it was a lesson learned. You know.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, I won't be going to my grave going, oh, I sure wish I would have tried that to get huge.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're out of time, guys. We appreciate everybody hanging out with us and everybody tuning in. Like I said before, if you want to take part in the next show, we're going to need questions. So definitely comment below. And of course, check out our sponsors, TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK, SupplementSource.ca in Canada. Of course, STROM Sports Nutrition for those of you in the UK. Patreon, I appreciate the heck out of you guys. Thank you for everything you do over there. Of course, you can reach out to us for coaching. You can go to bodyberry.com to reach out to Andrew, teamskip.com, reach out to Skip. Hit me up at mcnallydiets@gmail.com. And that's it. That's all we got for you. Skip, you went on a decent rant. You got to rant a little on this one.
It's hard when I don't swear.
Yeah.
It's not as fun.
Did I swear once?
I don't think so. You did better than me then.
Both shows. Yeah. Just saying.
For another episode of Blood, Sweat, and Gear, guys, we'll see you soon. Thanks for everybody on the live stream.
YouTube can monetize me.